All right, so for this review before the React assessment, it's unfortunately not a review of the television show Rick and Morty. It's a review of we're going to build a React app, the Rick and Morty React app that we've all been working on to sort of review everything we've been learning. And I've just made a list here and I have a TL draw that we can look at as well. And the feature set is, as you've noticed, quite similar to the Game of Thrones that we built yesterday in class. So I actually just kind of copied my TL draw over from that. And there might be one or two things I'm missing here, but I think this gives us like 75% of what we need. So just to recap, we're going to make a number of pages. We're going to make a header component. Our header component will probably hold some information about the number of favorite users, but we might not need to do that off the bat. Up here in blue is the URL, the path, the route for each page. So we're going to have a home page. We're going to have an about page. And as you all know, like this container here, all of these get contained in app.js, right? And in fact, get rendered inside the outlet. So just to very briefly review, if we were to kind of write out everything that's happening, it would look a bit more like this, where let's say this is, the outlet component, and our outlet component lives inside actually, excuse me, because I guess let's just call this one right here app, since that has the header as well. And let's make the outlet red right there. Let's make the outlet red right here. And then we can make this black again. And we'll make this a component. Right, just to sort of like review the component tree and the component hierarchy of things. And note that app also holds our header component. And this is sort of similar to the diagram that we had from the other day. If I hop back over here briefly, because again, the structure of our Rick and Morty application is going to be very similar to what we did for Game of Thrones, where the header component is a child of the app component. The outlet component is also a child of the app component. And we don't directly control what outlet renders. React Router does for us. And it renders all these different children depending on the different route. And we learned about outlet context and React context, where if I, create and pass in some context to my outlet, then by using that use outlet context hook, any component, like say the character card, that is a child of that outlet, by using that hook, can grab whatever we put into that context object, right? So character card can grab the context object. If we wanted to, the about page or the home page or the favorites page could grab the context object. What could not grab the context object, as was discussed, is header, because it is not rendered inside the outlet. It's outside the outlet. And in fact, we just passed the favorites information in as a prop there. So we're going to build something very similar here for Rick and Morty, similar paths. We're going to have characters route, character / ID, and favorites and about. And the process that I'm going to go through building this should take us through about, 2/3 of it. We're going to install, we're going to do all our setup work, create our directories, create our header. I'm going to take the shortest, fastest path to getting the router hooked up. So I'm going to make the simple pages. we're going to then make the all characters page and the character card we need. And then I think the individual character page, and we'll save, create the favorites page for last, and use outlet context. And I'll flesh this out once we get here. Do folks have any questions before we dive in and start coding? Okay, awesome. And I think what I'm going to do is close out this sidebar and do a split. Tim, yes, sir.
Sorry, I laid back a little bit, but do you always do this pseudocode before you start a project when you are like, in the routine of every day? Like, do you even need it at that point, or are
I
you just
always
doing it for
do.
demonstration? You always do?
No,
Okay.
100%. In fact, I'll pseudocode out even for like small things that I'm working on. What I like to do is I'll make pseudocode in comments, and then I'll like write the code directly under those comments.
Okay, I
Yeah,
like that.
I
Thank
think
you.
absolutely. I think it's incredibly helpful. So in fact, and going down this list, I need to install some dependencies. I know I'm going to need Axios. I'm going to want to use Bootstrap. So we need to install React Bootstrap and also Bootstrap, and React Router. And the name for that npm package is React Router DOM. And I think those are all the dependencies that we need. If there's another that I forgot, we'll get it along the way. I am going to go ahead and create components and also create a pages directories. And and my apologies. Let's make those things directories and not files. Tim, to answer your question as well, to kind of build on your question, tests are in a certain way a really good form of pseudocode. And that's the whole principle of test-driven development, of writing the tests first. For the assessment, you all don't have to write the tests, but I do highly recommend reading the tests first. Like if you take an hour or 20, 30 minutes to read a test and then get to work, it might seem like it takes longer, but I think what you'll find is then when you go to write code, it actually will go much, much quicker. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create, now that I've installed my dependencies and created my directories, let's make this header component so we can get another component here showing up. And we're going to use the great, Mikhail, thank you so much for sharing that extension. I know I was like, oh, I like using Vim at first, but this is actually really nice to do it this way. And let's actually use a little Bootstrap here. Let's actually borrow from the React Bootstrap docs, and let's steal their navbar component code, just like we had been doing. So I'm just going to copy this basic example and get rid of the bits that I don't want. And again, I'm very much against copying and pasting code. The one exception I think is like, at some point, yes, you all absolutely should take the time to really read through the Bootstrap navbar and understand what it's doing. But they're giving us a 100% working example, and there are several like interrelated React Bootstrap components with the navbar. So if this gets me from like 0 to 75, and also the important thing here is there's no concepts that my lack of understanding will make it harder for me to code effectively for the rest of this application, right? This is just the navbar. I'm not going to end up building on sand. But I am going to change the things. I'm going to leave most of these default classes. Home is fine. We're going to want an about page. I need to make all of these links real. So I'm just going to leave pretty much all of this as it is for now, because once I actually build out those routes, I'll come back here and make those links real. So this whole dropdown, we don't want, and let me make sure I didn't miss anything when deleting stuff. And let me go ahead and just import this into app.js and make sure that it's rendering. So let me hop back to our app, and over here, let's import my header. And run the dev server again, which I had stopped when I installed my dependencies. And there we go, right? And it's nothing fancy, but it's there. Though, in fact, it's not quite looking what I want it to be. And I did forget one important step with Bootstrap when installing stuff, which is I need to add the Bootstrap CSS. And I actually want to do that here in main JSX. And I need to import the minified CSS file from the Bootstrap npm package that we installed in the distribution directory. I want bootstrap.min.css. And I wasn't seeing, and in fact, you can see now with the hot reloading, all those CSS styles being applied. And so that's how I knew I had forgotten that step. I was like, oh, this doesn't quite look right. So now we've got a basic navbar set up. These links don't do anything yet. Actually, we can go ahead and build out those links, maybe just to have them so we don't have to come back to the navbar. So why don't we do that as long as we're here? I'm going to want to import the link component from React Router DOM. And I'm going to want to tell Bootstrap, hey, I want you to use all the really nice stylings of this navbar brand component, but for the actual behavior of what happens when the user clicks on this, I want you to use the React Router DOM link component. So Bootstrap has a prop named as, and we give that the link component. And then because the link component has a prop named to that takes the path that we want something to navigate to, we add to right there. And so now the link component still renders, or excuse me, the Bootstrap styling still renders, but it's going to, under the hood, be using this React Router DOM link component. And it looks like I have some sort of typo in my code. So let's see if the error message is useful or not. I'm seeing a ton of them. I wonder if maybe just these need to be double quotes instead of single quotes. Brandon, yes, sir.
Would it be a double curly brace around link or just a single curly brace?
Oh, it should just be a single curly brace. A double curly brace is if I am passing into this prop an object. Like when you all see the double curly brace, that's what's happening. That's what's happening. We're passing in an object. And I wonder, I did install React Router DOM. I'm getting this message, the above error occurred in the link component. I suspect the issue may just be I literally haven't done anything else with React Router DOM yet. Like I haven't, set up the provider or anything like that. So I don't know for sure if that's causing it, but because of that, I'm just going to leave this as is, and I'm just going to come back to adding this stuff after we've hooked up React Router DOM. And if this bug goes away, I'll know that the issue was that the link component gets unhappy if the other React Router DOM stuff isn't set up. If the issue is still there, we'll debug it then, and I'll at least have like eliminated one possible source of error. So let me go ahead and I've created a header, so I'll have to circle back and add the links to it. But I want to create my home page and about page so that when I create my routing, I'll have some pages I can route to. So let me just create these pages real quick, and they're going to be super simple. Like we've seen, there's going to be the about page. And my apologies, folks. Let me move that tab over. Yeah, and Mikhail, this really is a great, that simple React snippets extension is really nice. And I'm going to go ahead and create a home page as well. And now that I have some pages, I can actually do some interesting stuff with my routing. And the first thing I need to do when using React Router is create the router.jsx file. And I need to import create browser router from React Router DOM, because we're going to use that to construct the router object that holds all of our routing. And Dustin demoed, like yesterday, there's another way to do this that is cool. You get to use router components. But this is the way that we're teaching, and it lets you use an outlet as well. So again, with the assessment, as long as tests are passing, it's a little bit of dealer's choice. But my recommendation would be kind of stick with the approach that we've showed, unless you have really strong feelings of one way or the other. And I know I'm going to need to export this, and this is going to be the only thing that I export. So I'm going to make it the default export, so I don't have to use curly brackets when importing it. And I made a little bit of a mistake here. Can anyone tell me what mistake I made actually here? And I'm kind of giving a big hint with my cursor jumping around. Raven, yes, sir.
Instead of the curly brackets, it should just be the gray brackets.
Yeah, exactly. And what's the difference, Raven, between the curly brackets and the square brackets in JavaScript?
So the curly is creating a object, and then that one's creating an array.
Yeah, exactly, man. You hit the nail on the head. And I'm just so used to like configuration stuff being objects, I forgot that for our router, we have an array of routes, right? And the first and most important route to create is the root path for our whole application that's going to use app.jsx. And that route is going to have some child routes, which again is going to be an array of route objects. And the home page, since I want it to be the default page that renders, I don't need to pass it a path. I can instead set this index property to true. And the element is going to be homepage. For the about page, there is a path. And the element is going to be the about page. So now I've got my router. I'm now going to go to main.jsx, and I'm going to import my router. And I'm also going to import the router provider from React Router DOM. I'm going to get rid of this strict mode stuff. And we're going to use the router provider component. We're going to pass it the router object. And now React Router DOM should be doing some routing for us. And let's see if this is working or not. If I go over here to the browser, I don't think this anchor link should be affecting anything, but just to be sure. And if I go to the about page, let's see if this works. And of course, I've forgotten the thing that is always so easy to forget. What do I need to do in app.jsx so that the router can actually render stuff when we go to different routes? Chris, yes, sir.
The outlet,
Y-
Yeah.
Yeah,
better.
exactly.
Hmm.
The outlet component. That's sort of our wormhole component where React Router says, oh, like here's the outlet for all of my routing frustrations. Here's where I put the things. Here's where when the user goes from the about page to the home page, I render something. And so now we're cooking. We've created homepage and about page. We've set up minimal routing. And I am showing like this very particular flow for a reason, because I think it makes it really easy to debug as you go and build up functionality. And let's go now and let's go back to the header. Let's see if those link components work and if that error maybe resolved itself. And I think I'm going to simplify it a bit. Let's start by doing it here with one of these nav links. And see if the problem is solved. So I'm telling React Bootstrap, hey, I want you to use the styling of this Bootstrap nav.link component, but use the React Router link component for the actual behavior so that React Router can do its thing. And I now need to give it the path that it should take. So this is a good start. I'm not getting any errors. It seems to be working. Let's just, in fact, copy and paste that. And here, we'll change this to be about. And let's see if this works. Awesome. And now let's try it over here with the navbar brand that was throwing the error before and see if this works as well. And we're not seeing any errors, which is always a good sign. And now the navbar takes us back to the home page. So indeed, the issue I ran into before was using that link component inside here. If we haven't set up React Router DOM yet, it makes React Router unhappy. So we're off to a good start. You know, there's more that could be added here. I could add more styling and some actual content on these pages. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to just set up some very simple code so we can focus on functionality and come back to styling later. Gary, yes, sir.
That was an accident, my bad.
Nope, no worries. But actually, this is the perfect time for questions. Tim, yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you bring in the Rick and Morty navbar part, can you do it without a link and you can just it'll just load, or do you have to have a link using React Router? Because that routes the data to the link.
You need to use the React Router link component with any links that you want here in the Bootstrap navbar or anywhere in our app where we want to link. We need to use the React Router link component so that React Router will be controlling the URL bar and the browser won't do a page refresh.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, welcome. And I'm going to add just a little bit of content to the about page, just enough to be interesting. And I think that's maybe Emmett that gave me a lorem ipsum. And I'm going to copy this because I'm also going to use it on the homepage. I will just say Rick and Morty, you know, fan site homepage. And let me go ahead and close this out. And as long as I'm doing this, I might as well add just a little bit of CSS to things in app CSS. And I think the first thing I actually want to do is that root div that's in the index.html. Let's make its height and width the full size of the viewport, so that if we're using like percents and relative sizes, everything will be full sized. And there was a very minor change here that happened as I did that. And so just to reiterate, this div with the ID of root is actually in the index.html that Vite creates. And what I did in the CSS is I said, hey, I want the size of this to be the full size of the viewport in the browser so that it takes up all the space, since this is our whole app. And then this way, if we're using any other relative stuff in our CSS, like 100% or whatever, it will all be relative to that. And I think I want to make like maybe some sort of like page description page class or something like that that I can use here. So let's go to the home page. Let's maybe add a class, and the class will be, we'll just call it description page. If I needed a class ID for any reason, like say for a test that needed to be able to find this, I would set the ID to be homepage, right? So just to give you all a heads up, you may in the assessment need to set class IDs on certain divs or elements in order to get tests to pass. But now that I have this description page CSS, let's build this out a bit. Let's maybe have like the text align be in the center. Let's maybe just have the width be 70% of the width of the whole viewport. Though that is, I wonder if just 70% relative will look better. And let's see if we can't quickly so it looks like it is, I wonder what is causing that giant space to the right. So if we want to get this looking like nicer, I think we need to use a little flex box. So I don't think I want to do too much with this right now. But to be honest, we might come back later and maybe we'll use like a bootstrap container and the grid system or something like that to get this laid out nicely. Like I wonder if we do container. We put a container here. And that actually does a very nice job. So this is the bootstrap container component. And just for simplicity and in the interest of time, I'm not gonna do too much with like rows or columns for the grid system, but the container sort of like adds some margin and padding on the left and right and handles keeping everything centered for me. So I do like that. And I could put it right here around the outlet. And that actually might make sense because then everything else that goes inside here is lined up a certain way. So let's actually do that instead. And I think that will work fine because pretty much everything that we're going to create and that goes inside this outlet component, we probably want to be organized that way anyway. It's a little bit of dealer's choice whether you want to do it like this or put it on the individual pages, but this way we don't have to worry about it. And now I've got a home page and about page that are a little more interesting. And now I think is definitely a good time to move on and start building out some features and say getting the list of all the characters. I just want to check in and see if folks have questions or things that it might be good to review or look over the code for before we start building out the all characters page. Cool. And actually, let me check in and ask folks, is there anything in particular you all would like to make sure we cover in the review today? Because, you know, I'm going through a sort of a build of the whole thing, but if there's particular stuff where people are like, yeah, I really want to make sure we see this, then we can definitely, I can do my best. Chris, yes, sir.
Yeah, can you go over use param? Because I was trying to do that last night and it wasn't. Well, I was getting a 500 internal server error for some reason. So yeah, I got to figure that out. But yeah, I stopped from there.
Yeah, and I'm making a little list right now. We will definitely go over use params. That's a good one. What else would people like to make sure we go over today in the review? Not a trick question, I promise. Polly, yes.
I mean, I don't know if we're gonna have time, but I would definitely love to see a little more of the Cypress testing. I don't know if that's gonna be part of the review.
I will try to, but that one we may not be able to get to just because of time. If we can, we will. But I agree that that's a good one for sure. Mikhail, yes, sir.
Does the assessment involve any Cypress testing?
It does. There's going to be a test suite just like with the OOP assessment. All right. Cool. Thank you, folks. If there are other things that you want to make sure we hit in the review today, just let me know as we go. I'm kind of assuming if I'm not hearing anything else on the list, then sort of the Rick and Morty plan is a good one. Again, if there is something you want to make sure we cover, please say it. Otherwise, there's no way to, know that that's on people's minds. Let's build out the all characters page. And then that will lead us nicely into looking at use params. And I am going to close out the README right now just to give us a little more screen real estate. But just to review the plan quickly, I'm going to make the all characters page. I'm going to write the code to make the Axios API call to get the characters. And once I have that console logging and working, then I'll make the character card component, and then I'll hook it up to actually render all the characters. And this way I can do it a step at a time and make sure everything works as I go. Eric, yes, sir.
Sorry to backtrack just a little bit. I had something come up that I had to deal with, but can you explain again why we're wrapping the outlet in that container in your app?
Yeah, it gives us nicer CSS styling. That's the Bootstrap container component. You could write some CSS to do this, but note how there's no margin, there's no padding. The container is the container for Bootstrap's grid for layout. So I just wanted to use it just to get some nice margin and padding here so that everything in here will kind of like look nice and be a bit more centered.
Okay, and that'll apply to all your children too, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's make this all characters page component. And I'm going to close this out because we're not going to need the sidebar for much. And we're going to make all characters. Now that it exists, let's just make like an H2. We'll say all characters. We'll put that in there for now. Before I even do any work here, I want to hook this up to my router. So I'm going to go to router.jsx, and I need to add another route, right? I need to add another path. And it's going in here because the all characters page is a child of our root path for the whole application. It's going inside app.jsx. And the URL, the path for this will be characters. And this is going to then render the all characters page component. And by like tab completing and hitting enter, VS Code does the import for me, which I like as just a nice little shortcut. And I'm also going to hop over to the header and add over here another link to the all characters page. And again, the nice thing is I can just test each a little bit as I go. My links work, my routing works. I know that all that has been hooked up before I even start doing the Axios stuff. So I know that we're going to need to use Axios to make some HTTP calls. I know that I'm going to need use state and use effect to have React be able to manage those HTTP calls and that data nicely. I know that I'm going to, once I get the data from the Rick and Morty API, store it in some React component state so that my component will know how to render it. So I'm just going to go ahead and make that React component state right now. I know from experience that I will get back an array of JavaScript objects, of JSON objects, right? So I'm going to set the default value for this React component state to be an empty array so that when I do have this stuff rendered, nothing breaks when the array is empty. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Rick and Morty API and go look at which endpoint I want to grab. And here I want to get all the characters. And in fact, I'm looking at this and I remember that there's a bit of an issue with pagination where there's multiple pages. So I can't just get all of my characters in one API call. I might actually have to do this in a couple steps. So let's actually pseudocode out what we want to do, and then we can write it out. So I'm just down here going to start writing some pseudocode. We're going to need to like make the async function and put it in a use effect. I'm going to need to make HTTP get request to get a page of characters. I'm going to need to add that page of characters to my component state, add to any characters we already have. I don't want to overwrite stuff. I'm somehow going to have to figure out, I'm going to have to keep making API calls for each page until I get all the characters. I'm somehow going to have to figure out when I'm done and I've gotten all the characters. And as it so happens, if I look at this mock data telling me what this API call sends back, here in this info object, it tells me the total number of pages, 42. So I know that I can use info.pages for total pages. And that's probably going to help me a lot, right? So this is sort of my pseudocode. If honestly, you may want to make the pseudocode like more detailed. But this is a good starting point for me to get started with something like this. And the use effect hook takes an arrow function and our dependency array, which I'm just going to leave empty so that this use effect will fire once, right when after the component first mounts and renders. And just inside here, I'm just going to make a get character page function, and it's going to have to be an async function, and it's going to, I'm going to pass it a page number. And I think what I wanted to do is use Axios to make a get request. And I think let's just make it look like this, and we'll do const response equals await, because this is the asynchronous part, the actual HTTP request. Axios get, and let me just copy this stuff in right here. And this is going in the template literal. And instead of page 2, it's going to be the page number, right? And then what I want to do once I have the page is I want to update my character's state. So I'm going to do something like this, where I'm going to use the set characters update use state, but I need to combine these two arrays together into a new one. So if I already have some characters, let's destructure that array into this new one that we're creating, and let's add the new characters like this, and we'll do response.data.results. And so now what I should be able to do, I just want to test out that this works. Let's try this for page 1 and just and then in fact let's also console log out here maybe after let's just do it right below here. Let's just console log characters just to make sure the stuff is getting in there the way it should be. And so now nothing is rendering, but I'm really hoping to see a console log with characters. And I do, but something looks a little off in that this array is empty. So what I'm just going to do is line by line, let's use some console logs for debugging. Let's console log the response. So that looks right. It just looks like there's no response.data results. I must have made a bad assumption about what Axios is doing. I'm just gonna maybe make sure I'm looking at the right thing. No, okay, so there is response, and there's config, and there is indeed data, and there is info, and there is results. So that's correct. Mikhail, yes.
Do you have to spread the response data results as well?
Oh yeah, I absolutely do. Thank you so much. And this was in fact the same mistake that I made the other day. Yeah, so this is an easy mistake to make, folks. I did not spread the response, and that gave me a problem. Just to very quickly demonstrate what I did wrong, let me open up Node.js here. If I have one array, foo, and we'll just have it be like 1, 2, 3, and I have another array bar, and we'll have it be 4, 5, 6, and I want these two arrays to be combined into a third one, which we'll call Baz. What I did was ... foo bar, and this was wrong, and we'll see why. And so you all can see I spread part of the array, but not the whole thing. And what that spread operator, the 3 dots, does is breaks up each element of the array and puts it in the new one. Chris, yes, sir.
Okay, I was just about to ask about the spread operator, but so you're just adding character and response. Character, I just never seen it like that before. I always did something else. I always just did response data results, and that's it for us for set.
Yeah, and this one is a little different. And let me put this here to see if that solves the issue. Yeah, okay. So this is putting the console log after the use effect is what we want, because we guarantee the use effect is fired. So the reason we're doing it this way, because Chris, you're right that a lot of the time we can do it a different way, is I know that my API call, well, I think it only gives me 1 page of data. Yeah, my API call only gives me the first 20 characters, right? And in fact, we can poke down in here and we see info, count, the next API call we need to make, the total number of pages, and then results right here. right? So I know that I'm going to need to make like 43 or 42 API calls to get all the characters. And each time I do, I don't want like the new page of characters to overwrite the last. I want to combine them two together. So I end up with all of the characters in this characters array. Does that help answer your question, Chris?
It doesn't. But so, all right, I guess let me just continue to watch and maybe it'll click.
Yeah, I think that'll help. Because I think what you're saying is like, hey, in the past, like what I've done is I've just done set characters, response, data, results.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I do this, we'll see this in a minute, but the issue with this is if I do this, the page 2 characters, I won't have page 1, page 2, page 3 all combined in this array. I'll have page 1, then it'll get overridden by page 2 and page 3. But we haven't written that code yet. So I think once that code is there, it'll be easier to see.
Gotcha.
Daniel, yes, sir. Yeah, for sure. And good question.
So on line 14, the async page, so every time the state page changes, you're fetching a new page? I'm just a little confused of the argument or parameter page in the async.
Yeah. So there is no React component state named page. This is just the name of an argument that I pass into my function. So right over here, I'm passing in 1. So when I call it then, the value of this is 1. And I use it right here.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Yeah, I just realized it's part of the Rick and Morty API.
Yeah. Nope, you're good. And so what I'm going to do is I need to call this 42 times, and I'm going to code up a loop to do that for us. Now, in a perfect world, what we would do is since the API actually gives us the total number of pages, I would grab that from the first API call and use that. What I could also do is since when I get to the very last page, next is going to be null, I could do a while loop. But what if the Rick and Morty API screws up and I end up in an infinite loop? Since I see the total number of pages here for like a prototype and first make it work, then make it good, I'm just going to hard code this loop in right here. And I'm just going to do a very simple for loop. And we'll just say to do, get total number of pages from API for now. I'm hard coding it. So, let I equal 1 while I is less than 43, right? Or let's just say less than equal to 42, I plus plus. And in fact, instead of naming this I, why don't I name this page num, since that's what this really represents. And here, let's do page num. And let's see if this works. And it looks like I made an error in my code along the way. So let's do a refresh to kind of see this error message. Cannot access page num before initialization. And that would be because I have a typo right there where it was saying, hey, you're trying to set this thing equal to itself, but it hasn't even been created yet. And one moment, Brandon, let me see about getting this code working. And I think what I'm going to do is characters state, because I have a lot of console logs here and it's a little hard for me to tell what's what. And I don't think this quite did what I wanted because I'm only seeing 40 characters in here when I thought I would see more. So let's see let's change this a bit. Let's do maybe like console log, get characters for page, and let's put page. And when we get the response, let's maybe say like, got characters, array length, response dot data dot results dot length. And let me go ahead and clear this and run this again. And it looks like the issue I ran into was I'm not sure I'm making all the API calls that I should be, because we're calling this, but my await maybe seems to be having an issue. Though indeed, if I look in the network tab, I'm making a bunch of API calls and I'm getting stuff back each time. So that part's going okay. And I get an array length back of 20. And it looks like I probably did something silly in terms of how I update the React component state. So in terms of debugging, right, I simplified, I made the console logs easier to read, so I can look at this and it's actually helpful for me and I can see what's working and what's not. I double checked in the network tab. And so I confirmed, hey, I am indeed making 42 API calls and I'm getting the data that I want back for each one, right? Here's metal Rick. If I go down here, I see that it's a different Rick. But I see that that character's component state doesn't get updated. So that tells me where my problem is. And that the problem is with something that I'm doing here. And oh, excuse me. And this may be something silly. And in fact, let's kind of go back to your question from before, Chris. Let's do it the way that I'm pretty darn sure does not get me what I want, which is if I just set characters to response.data.results. So that'll work, but what we end up with is, if I look what's here in the character state, when all is said and done, I have the very last page of characters. And what I want is all of them together. Right, so there's something in here that I have not done right. And I wonder if it's about like sort of where I have this get characters page defined inside the use effect. And the way that React component state is working, where this is not getting updated at the right time for each of these API calls. But let's kind of take it a step at a time. Because this is what I had. And I don't think that's right, because, and if I look here, and in fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to render all the characters to help me debug this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check, hey, let's look at this characters array. If there's anything in it, let's do characters.map, and we'll just do C for the character object and I for index. And let's just put it in a div for now. And we'll do like C.id and C.name. So we'll look at the character ID and the character name. And if there's nothing, we're just going to render a loading message. And I need to add some opening and closing parentheses around my map function. And let's see what this error is and resolve it. And it says unexpected token, expected comma. So this tells me I probably have a relatively simple syntax issue hiding in here somewhere. And it looks like it's right here. And the issue is I kind of tried to squeeze too much in here, and React doesn't like it. Let me do a little formatting, and let me wrap these in parentheses. And I think that will resolve the issue. No, it looks like it's still unhappy. And if I look at it, it's telling me it expected a comma here, which tells me that I made I definitely made a syntax error. And I made the syntax error with this ternary statement. So what I want is characters.length. If it's truthy, if it's a length of 1 or higher, it will be truthy. I want to do all this map stuff. If it's falsy, I want to do this other stuff. And I screwed up my closing parentheses on the map, because the map ends here inside the ternary. And then outside it is when we have the other second part. And I think this squiggly is just maybe from, we'll just leave the extra parentheses even though it's not needed. So this is actually really helpful. I can at least see the list of all the Ricks I'm getting. And I see that this is not quite the order that I want things in. It looks like I'm getting some, but not others, and something isn't working right. So, you know, this tells me that there's something wrong happening with how I'm updating state. And I think that the way to solve that problem is, let's use React the way it's supposed to be used. Because I'm not 100% sure what I did wrong here, but I'm pretty sure the state is updating before, like, we're making these API calls before the state is updating, and React is kind of having a hard time keeping everything in order. And I'm doing this for loop, like right here, like inside the use effect. And I think that's what's causing the problem, is that I have the for loop inside the use effect. Because the job of the use effect is to know when to do this stuff and then guarantee that it's done before we do anything else. And right now the use effect can't really do that. So I think I actually do need a bit more of React component state. And I think I need to use effect to like do each one. So we're going to make a little bit of a change here. We're going to get rid of the loop. And we're going to do it a different way. And I'm not going to pass in page num or page as an argument. What I'm going to do here is we're going to do page num, set page num, and we'll do use state. And we're going to set the initial value of the page number to 1. And we're going to use, we can get rid of this here, and we'll call this page num. And over here, we'll call this page num. And so now we're going to set the character, and we're going to set the page num to page num +1. And I'm going to have use effect fire whenever page num changes. And let me do a page refresh. And this is what I was expecting to see and where I got a little off track. And Chris, maybe this helps illustrate the answer to your question of why we need to do this array destructuring. And in fact, I'll circle back to that in just a moment. But let me explain what I got wrong here, and why this works. So the problem that I ran into was React doesn't always actually update a component state like right away. It's called batching. And then especially with this async function, I'm pretty sure what was happening was we were getting our HTTP responses back, and sometimes the component state got updated and sometimes it didn't. And if you look now how all these IDs are in order, and before they weren't, like it started in the 400s and then there were some 500s. That's how I kind of knew the problem was I'd done something wrong in terms of how I update component state. And this is actually a great example of why use effect is important, because use effect's job is to make sure that all of this stuff happens before we move on to rendering. Except for the very first time that a component loads, when this happens afterwards. And so by using component state and by having this separate bit for page num, this works the way it should. We update the page num and we tell use state to watch the page num. We tell, use effect to watch the page num. So use effect now makes sure before I fire this use effect again, to get the character page, it makes sure this stuff has happened. So use effect controls the order for us to make sure that the React component state gets updated when it should, so that our characters array has stuff added to. And so if I wasn't doing this array destructuring and I just did set characters to be response.data.results, what we would see is, and let me do a hard refresh here. You can see it happening here. It's loading all those characters, but we're not getting, right? It's replacing them each time. And that's not what I want. And that's why we do the array destructuring. And this is definitely a good point to pause and check in and see what questions folks have, or what bits of this would be good to review. And Chris, did that kind of help illustrate the answer to your question from before?
Yes.
Cool.
So,
Brandon, yes, sir. Oh, sorry. What's up? What's up, Chris?
no, you can go ahead.
Brandon, yes, sir. What's up?
So use effect fires without calling it.
Use effect, if I do this, if I give an empty dependency array right here on line 25, use effect will fire once right after the component renders for the very first time when it mounts. If
Okay,
I put, if I put something in here, and what we almost always put in here is component state, use effect will watch that, and every time this changes, use effect will fire. And then because I update it here, use effect is causing itself to fire, basically, until page num. I think eventually it becomes null. So in fact, I should probably put a little like if statement in here to make sure I don't loop forever. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that right here, because I don't want to depend on the Rick and Morty API, even though it is nice.
Could you not just set 43 to response.data.pages.
Eventually
it-
it gets set to 42. I might have, this loop might have been firing forever, to be honest, without this if statement. I'm not sure if I inadvertently gave us like an infinitely firing loop here. And if I look at the network tab, let's see what's going on. And it, oh, I commented out get characters. That's the issue. So we can see, in fact, we can watch what happened. Use effect sets the page num. Because use effect is also watching the page num, the use effect gets fired again. I'm pretty sure, and here we get an error and it stops. But I kind of don't want to depend on that behavior to stop my looping. I'm just going to hard code the total number of pages for now as a nicer way to stop my looping. And so now I can get all of the pages. So just to reiterate, I need a bit of component state to update the page number that I want to get. I want use state to make an API call every time that page number changes. And every time I get a page, I want to say, hey, update the page num so we can go get the next one. And then I want to say, hey, let's make sure we don't get more pages than actually exist. And I see, what other questions do folks have around this or bits of this that might be useful to go over again? Okay. Oh, Chris, yes, sir.
All right, so this is the all page session. Can you do the individual character page?
Yeah, totally. Do you all want to do a 5-minute break and then we do the individual character page? Yeah, let's do it. Let's take 5, folks. It'll be a real 5, and then we'll build out the individual character page. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right, so just to recap, and let's actually start with the pseudocode. What did we need to do? We needed to make an async function to get a page of characters and put it in a use effect. I need to add that page of characters to my component state because I want to get all the characters, and there are 42 pages of them. I want to make sure I'm not like overwriting data, which is why we do the destructuring of the array here. And since each API call only gets me 1 page of characters, I have to keep making API calls until I got them all, right? Until I get all the characters. I also need to know when I'm done so I don't have an infinite loop or an API call that throws an error. So just to recap the working implementation without putting aside the bugs, the async function follows a pattern that we're familiar with now. Where I'm making my API call to get a page of characters. Because the URL is going to be different, I need this to change. And for reasons that I'll talk about in a moment, I need the page number to be in component state. So I made my component state up here for the page number, and I set it to 1 as the default, because that's the first page that I want to get. And then when I get my response, I want to grab that array of that page of characters and combine it with any characters that I've already gotten, right? So that I don't end up with the characters on page 42. I end up with all 42 pages of characters in the characters array. And then I need to increment page number so that I'll make an API call to go to the next page. And this does 2 things that are important. One is we use page number here. So this is how Axios makes the right call to get page 2 and page 3 and page 4. And also, I'm telling useEffect to listen to the page number variable. And every time the page number variable changes, useEffect will call this whole function here. And the useEffect's job is to make sure that, hey, before React does anything else, all this stuff should happen. So Brandon, like you were saying, useEffect makes sure everything in this arrow function is done before we move on. So the page loads, useEffect fires for the very first time. We make the API call, we get the data, we add it to the character state. We then update the page number. useEffect waits until this component state has been updated. And that was the problem I ran into before. And then because we've changed the page number, useEffect calls this function again. But now we're doing it for page 2. And then page 3 and 4 and so on. And we have an if statement right here to make sure that once we get the last page, we stop. So that I don't just keep incrementing page number forever or get an error in my HTTP response because this URL is bad. Eric, yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, the way I'm thinking about it is kind of like we just made our own while loop. So it's like while page number is changing, continue to run the function. It's just not as clear as saying while this, do this, you know?
Yes, the effect is the same. Yeah, the difference is we basically built a loop, but instead of using while or for, we use useEffect because useEffect listens for something. It pays attention to this, and if it changes, useEffect calls this function. And inside the function, we have the thing change. So we have the thing looping itself, but then this if statement here, make sure we don't have an infinite loop. Stop when we get to the last page. Yeah, so I think that's a good way to think about it, Eric. And so the next step here is let's make a character card. So later on when we get to favorites, we can have like an add to favorites button, and we can also have an individual character page. So I've gone ahead and I've done a little bit of setup. And what I did was I made a character card component, and I just grabbed this from the Bootstrap code. And it's pretty straightforward. As you can see, there's an image component that we're going to add the image URL to, the ID and the name. And these all are going to come from this one prop character info. And that's going to be the JSON, the JavaScript object that we got back from our API. So fingers crossed, I can import character card. And then over here, and let's name this character info. Fingers crossed over here, we can use the character card component. And because we're making a list of a whole bunch of components of the same type, React needs to know how to tell them apart. And that's what this key prop is for. And then we're going to pass the character info, chart info. And I may need my opening and closing parentheses so that React can tell what's going on. And if it's easier to kind of like format the code this way, one way to do it is like this. And I do sort of like this style. It's really dealer's choice, though I guess now it needs me to put these in parentheses. Or actually, it looks like it doesn't like that at all. I apologize. So I'll just put this back to the way that worked.
You were missing a closing parentheses before the colon.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you. You don't have to write the code this way. I just wanted to show this if in case this visual layout makes it a little clearer how the ternary works. If this is truthy, we map and do this stuff. And if it helps, we could put all this on one line. Otherwise, we show a loading message. And so now I have all of my characters. So let me go ahead and let's make the individual character page. Let's make this button do something. Let's use the use navigate hook. So we haven't made the individual character page yet, but let's set up the routing logic. And I'm just going to import the use navigate hook from React Router DOM. And this button, I'm just going to make this to say view details. And we're going to give it an onClick. And the onClick, I'm just going to put in here an arrow function. And I actually, the use navigate hook is a little different. I always forget this. The way I have to use it is I have to call use navigate, and it will return a navigate function that I can then use. And that's what I want to use here in my arrow function. And when I finish coding this, I'll do a quick review. So I want to navigate to character / ID. So just to kind of recap, when we're using React Router's use navigate hook, I need to call it right off the bat, and it returns a navigate function. And then when I call that navigate function, it will actually change the URL, and React Router will change the page to go to whatever path I put in here. And so here it's going to be the path of the character. And if I click on this, well, that character doesn't exist yet. So let's actually make a not found page so we can have our own error. So I'm going to maybe in pages. And we're going to keep it very simple. And we'll use that in just a moment. And it's probably time to create the character page. So let's go ahead and make that as well. And now let's update our routing. I can add an air element. So this could be a lot nicer, but at least now it exists, right? And now I want to add a path for an individual character. And remember, when I have a dynamic route where something might change, I need to do /:, and then really the variable name of that parameter in the URL. And the element here is going to be the individual character page. And actually, it might be nice to have a different error page for the character page saying, hey, this character doesn't exist. So how about not found character page.jsx? And let's just say this character does not exist. This character ID does not exist. And here in my router, I should be able to add another error element attribute to this particular path and say not found character page. And I'm not getting the tab completion I thought it. So let me make sure everything is right here. Not found character page, not found character page. So that looks okay. There we go. And if we refresh this, oh, it looks like that may not have worked the way that. So actually, this does work because the character exists. But if I do character 0, so actually, I apologize, folks. It looks like this one isn't working. I'm just going to get rid of that, and we'll come back to it later if we have time. Let's build out the character page. I thought that would be an easy win. So I've got an individual character page now, but we know it's going to need more stuff. And let's start putting some stuff here so that this can be interesting and useful. So first off, I need to get the param, right? I need to get the actual character ID. I'm going to need to use the use param hook from React Router DOM. And use params is going to return an object of everything in this URL. In this case, there's only that one param of ID. So I'm going to do const ID equals use params. And let's just right here, let's make this a div. Let's make this an H2. And just right here, let's just say character ID is ID, just to make sure that this works. And let's see if this works. And indeed, it looks like something is not working. So let's look at the console and see if we have errors. And indeed, I did make an error. This is actually a really easy error to make. Down here, sort of near the bottom left, it says no route locations matched for characters/character/3. And in fact, if I look in the URL bar, I see characters/character/3. That is not the URL we want, right? We just want character/3. And the mistake I made is if we go to the character card, here in navigate, because I did not start with the slash, it combined these URLs. It combined characters, the route we were already on, characters with character. And in fact, let's watch that happen and then let's fix it. So let's watch the problem. If I click on view details, notice how character/2 has been combined. And that can be useful sometimes, but is often not what we want. And the way we tell React Router, hey, I don't want you to combine, I want you to go to a different route entirely, is we need to make sure our path when we're using navigate where the link component starts with a slash. And so now, note that indeed changes and I see the character ID. And in fact, I'm going to fix my typo on the character page. So this is the use params hook. And this is really the core way that you all will need to use it. And let's go ahead and let's add the information that we need to make the API call to get the character data. And then we can take a look at using outlet context and adding a favorites page for the last bit of the class. So I need to make an API call to get this character information. And that way, if I copy and paste this URL in, the React app will grab it. I actually don't want to pass the character information around. And so I know that I'm going to need to use state and use props, or use state and use effect, excuse me. Use state and use effect. I know I'm going to need to use Axios. I know that I'm going to need some React component state for my character info. So let's go ahead and create it now. And I know that I'm going to end up with an object. So let's initialize this to an empty object. I know that I'm going to need a use effect. So let's go ahead and create the use effect now. And we're going to give it an arrow function and an empty dependency array. And inside here, let's just create the async function we'll need to get a character. And it's going to be an async function, an async arrow function. And we're going to grab a response by having Axios, and I need to use await because this is the asynchronous part of the operation. Make an HTTP call, and that HTTP call is going to the Rick and Morty API. And I have my guide code that I'm looking at here, / character ID. Right, so we grab the param from the URL using the use params hook, and then we use that param to make an API call to get the right stuff. And then once we get it, we update state to be response.data. It might just be response.data. I'm not sure if there's results or info. Let's do a console log and let's see. And let's refresh this page. And so there's some errors, but let's see if the errors matter or if they're just errors from stuff in progress. So it looks like I may have made a typo or had an issue with, oh, of course, I made the simplest of all possible errors, folks. Can anyone tell me, like, and I'll add a console log here, in fact, so we can see the error. So when I refresh the page, you know, I should see this console log making API call. What did I forget to do? Why is this not happening at all? And the good news is this is the simplest kind of mistake to make. Eric, yes, sir.
You didn't call get character.
Yeah, exactly. I got so excited about writing get character that I forgot to call it.
I do have a question regarding calling the API here on this page, though. And I think you mentioned it earlier that we didn't want to pass character info around.
Yeah.
So why would we not want to just like pass in the characters that we have in our other page?
Totally. So let's say you mean like, you know, pass in the character info we get from the all characters page.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's say our app is a hit. I really love Rick and I share like the link to Rick with you like on WhatsApp or something. And you're like, all right, I want to go look at this in my browser. And you paste it in, and let's just open up the console just so we have it and hit enter. Well, if I interact with the React app this way, we never go to the all characters page at all. So how is this individual character page going to get that information about the character?
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's something new to start thinking about, that there's multiple ways, right, that we might sort of enter onto this page. Now that I've got some character information, and indeed it looks like it's just in response.data, I'm going to do sort of a console log for sanity to make sure that my character state is updated. And indeed, I'm seeing the character state here. So let's just print out a little bit of information about this character. And we don't have to get too fancy, but let's do, you know, and in fact, let's just destructure the character object, because I think there's ID, there's name, there's image, there's species, there's gender, there's, looks like it's actually location. Like if I look at what's in this object, created, episode, gender, ID, image, and then the location has a whole bunch of stuff, including name. Location, origin. equals character. And now, in fact, let's just do a little more I don't know if name comes from there. I think that's more than enough destructuring to get us started. And let's just do maybe ID for utility purposes, location dot name. And let's see what this doesn't like. Identifier ID has already been declared. So that's an easy mistake to make. We make ID up here and we need it for the character ID to do this stuff. So let's not grab it from there. And in fact, maybe I don't want to destructure at all, so I can just avoid this source of confusion entirely. And let's just do character.id, character.location.name. Character.name, let's maybe have an image, character.image, right? And just maybe like created as a p tag. So we can flesh this out with all the different details that we want, but we now have an individual character page, and I should now be able to go click on Beth, and I see Beth's information here. So this is a good point to pause and check in and see if folks have questions around use param in particular, or sort of like the logic of building out this individual character page. And, let's just add a couple more things as long as we're doing this. We've got gender, maybe like the character's origin. Indeed, we want to show. And I think that's a pretty good start. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the favorites page and outlet context? Brandon, yes, sir.
Just for final clarification, use params is specifically using the URL parameters.
That is exactly it. If I change this to 6, a little surprised that I wonder, let me see if there's something I did with my routing that is messing that up. It is using the URL param character/5. I must have just made a change in the character page that is doing something silly. Let me track down this error. But you are correct. Brandon, yes, sir.
Is it because you have to change the use effect?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that's the problem I ran into. Though this was working before, but probably because I was writing code. And yeah, I think that's exactly the problem. And if we look at these type errors, cannot read properties of undefined with name and so on and so forth. And they're coming from character page on line 26. That tells me that character.origin does not exist, right? And in fact, if we maybe let's make a ternary and let's do character.id. So if we've gotten the character and they have an ID, then we know that this stuff is good, and this character exists. And one moment, Daniel. If the character doesn't exist, let's say like loading. And let's put all of this inside a fragment so it will work. And so now we see this. This is okay. I think if I hit a page refresh, so now this actually works okay because it's not breaking stuff for us. So it actually turns out the issue was not putting something in the dependency list here for the use effect. The issue was before we've gotten the character data and the character state is an empty object, while character.id, these things don't throw an error. When I tried to get nested, like character.origin on an empty object is null. And then if I do .name on that, that throws an error and it breaks. And that's the error that we were seeing. And so that does highlight the importance of conditional rendering and thinking about like when it has my component state there and when is it not. And so now that we fixed that, we briefly see that loading message. The code doesn't break because the very first time a component mounts, use effect fires afterwards. And I don't think that putting this here would change that. Like, I think if we change this, we would still see the loading message flash. And indeed we do. So the very first time a component mounts and renders, use effect has not fired yet. And that's what we need this conditional rendering for. And so that way it doesn't break. We see a loading message, we make our API call, and then we render the character. Brandon, yes, sir.
So a good use for that second argument in the use effect would be like if we wanted to add a sort of like user input to go to a different character ID, we could track the ID change and then.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. Like if we had a drop down of characters and when you selected something from the drop down, we showed that character. That would be a great use case for use effect.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, totally. All right. I know we're running a little tight on time, so let me make sure that we get at least a little bit of time looking at context and outlet context. So the goal now is to make the favorites page, right? And just to do a very quick recap, the challenge is the same thing that we had on the Game of Thrones app, which is we have components rendered by the outlet that we want to be able to pass this favorites information around to, but we can't directly do that as a prop. So we need to use what's called React context, and specifically the context for the outlet component, outlet context. And the starting point for this, and let me go to app.jsx, is I know I'm going to need some component state to hold my list of favorites. So let's go ahead and make that now just to have that set up. And I know that my favorites is going to be an array of objects. So it's going to start out as an empty array. So I'm going to make a variable and I'm going to name it context object. And all the things that we want to pass into the outlet for the outlet to make available to all of its children, we are going to put in this context object. So let's do favorites and let's do set favorites so that all the different components have access to that if they need to. Brandon, yes, sir.
Could we instead put favorites, set the key favorites equal to an array favorites comma set favorites? That way we could in the future call favorites dot set favorites whatever.
We can do something very similar to that for sure. We could make a function add to favorites, right? And I think this would be the way to do what you're talking about, where we do set favorites and we say, hey, let's take the existing favorites and add the new favorite to that array. And we could make a function named, oh, how about remove from favorites? Where let's make this favorite to remove. We do set favorites, and I'm going to put inside here favorites dot filter, and let's do f for favorite, right? Where f dot id does not equal the ID of the thing we want to remove. And instead of passing the state setter, I could pass add to favorites and remove from favorites like this.
Well, I
The
was
way that, Brandon, I do apologize. We're going to get tight on time soon. So I will circle back for questions, but I want to make sure I can code out a minimal implementation of using the outlet context. And thank you for understanding. And we'll circle back and we'll take a couple questions on this at the end. Now that I have this context object, I pass it as a prop to the outlet, and the name of the prop for outlet is context. And we don't get to choose that name. React Router has done that. I can name this object, you know, whatever I want, but I'm naming it this so that it's clear what we're going to use it for. And I pass this object now as a prop. And so now the next step is any component that gets rendered as a child of the outlet can use the outlet context hook to grab this prop. And if we kind of look in, I know the component tree has a ton of providers, right? We have to scroll way down. And note, by the way, this component context dot provider, that's how this context object that we just passed as this context prop to outlet gets passed down into everything else, right? And if I go to the all characters page and we go way down, well, now the component tree gets way bigger because we have, let's find outlet is right here, right? Outlet context provider. Some components that React Router creates to do what it does are all characters page. And then I won't do any more collapsing because the collapsing causes it to jump. But inside the all characters page, we see all of these character card components. But the important thing is they're all inside a component that's inside the outlet. They're all children of the outlet, like children of the corn, but children of the outlet. So anything that's a child of the outlet, I can get this context object by using the use outlet context function, that hook function. So let's go to this character card and let's import use outlet context. And when I call this, and let's just name this the same thing, just for fun, it's going to return an object. And I can console log this. We're going to get a ton of console logs because we're going to see this for every single character card. But let's just see this just to see it. And if I refresh this page, it's somewhere in here. In fact, we see it here. Favorites, array 0, add to favorites is a function, remove to favorites is a function. So every single card now has grabbed this context object, which, you know, there may be more efficient ways to do it. I could use the context up here on the all characters page and then pass that stuff in as a prop. And that's a little bit of dealer's choice. But this is one good approach and it's good to see. So now that I've got this context object, let's destructure it to grab the things on the object properties that we care about. Favorites, add to favorites, remove from favorites. right? And it would be helpful to know if my character is a favorite or not. So let's do const is favorite. And what I'm going to do is favorites dot map, or excuse me, favorites dot filter f, and if the favorite ID equals my character's ID, we keep it. And this will give me an array. And if my thing is in there, it's just going to be an array of length 1. If my character's not in there, it's going to be an array of length 0. Right? 1 if is in there, which is truthy. 0 if it's not, which is falsy. And so now I can use this to make all the stuff that I care about for my add to favorites and remove from favorites button. And let's say like, how about const fave button message. If they're already a favorite, the message will be removed from favorites. If they're not a favorite yet, the message will be add to favorites. And how about favorite button function? If they're already a favorite, we are going to, this is going to be a little more verbose, but we are going to call remove from favorites with the character.id. And I'm going to use this syntax for the ternary. If they're not a favorite, we are going to call add to favorites with the character. Actually, I don't want to pass the ID. I want to pass the whole object. Excuse me. So this way, I have the message I want, depending on if they're a favorite or not. And someone has a hot mic, and I have the function I want. And let's stick this in a button. On click, favorite button function. And the message is favorite button message. And let's see, and it would help if I wrap this in my curly brackets. Let's see if this works. And we haven't gone to the favorites page, but this is already kind of a good sign that this is working. Right? And let's go ahead and just very quickly make the favorites page, and then we can take a couple questions, and then we'll have to break for the retro. And I'm just going to copy the all characters page for the favorites page because it's almost the same code. So I'm going to just make a new file. We're going to call it favoritespage.jsx. We're going to do that. I'm going to hop over to the all characters page. I know I'm going to want to import the character card. And let's actually just do a split as we put this together. I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it. And we'll have the favorites page over here. So I know I'm going to need a character card. So let's go ahead and bring that in. I know I'm going to need to use the use outlet context hook to grab this information. And let's do that right now, in fact. And let's just do favorites equals use outlet context. And we'll do a little formatting. And I don't need to make any API calls to get stuff. And I'm going to really basically copy this return statement from the all characters page, except instead of characters.length, characters.map, we're going to do favorites.length and favorites.map. And that should do pretty much everything I need. And now let's add this to our routing. And so now it's hooked up to the routing. Just for fun, let's add a link in our header because it's so straightforward. And let's see how we did. Let's see if this works. Let me refresh the page. Let's add Rick. Let's add Summer. Let's add Beth. And now if I go to favorites, I've got Rick and Summer and Beth. And even better, because I added the outlet context on the character card, all that logic with the button and the removing from favorites, it's all right there. And I think now is a good time to pause, and we probably hit our stopping point because we do have to switch over to the retro in just a moment. But I think we have just enough time for 1 or 2 questions. And Brandon, I know you had a question.
It's all right. I'll pass my time to someone else.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, what's on people's minds? I know we got towards the outlet at the end, but we got to see a full implementation. So what would be useful to review, or what code would be good to look at again?
A lot of people mentioned Cypress, if you can do anything with that, or at least maybe set up something so we can.
Unfortunately, we're gonna have to start the retro in just a minute.
Alright.
So I wish I could. If I can, maybe I'll try and get a video or something out in the afternoon, but we're not gonna be able to this morning.
I appreciate
Chris,
it, thanks.
For sure. Chris, yes, sir.
Yes, for character page, for all character page. So when you click view details, it goes to the individual character page. I just wanna.
Yeah,
wanna.
exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Exactly.
And then when
Yeah,
you go to add to favorites,
Yeah,
well, how do
and
you
in
go to
fact,
favorites? Yeah. Oh, okay.
I was going to say the view details is on the character card component,
Mhm.
but you have the right idea. And that's why even on the favorites page, we have this view details button that we can use. And you were also saying,
Yes, I was also saying, yeah, where do you? I see the tab for favorites, so never mind for where does it the favorites be added. Are you gonna upload the code on GitHub as well?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
What were you asking about favorites getting added?
The button add to favorites. Since it just added and not go to the actual favorite page, I was curious where do you go to the actual favorite page, but I saw the tab where on the nav bar, so never mind.
Got it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Add to favorites doesn't take us anywhere. And my apologies if the flow got a little confusing. We add to favorites, and the button does get updated, right? Because with outlet context, we're grabbing the state and the state gets updated. But then, yeah, to navigate to the favorites page, I just use the link I made in my header. And I saw a couple other questions, Raven and then Tim.
So inside of your app JSX is the variable context object, and then you pass it into your outlet tag. Is that what's allowing you to use
Exactly. Like if I added a function, like let's just say I made an arrow function foo, and it said, hello. That is now available wherever I'm using the outlet context hook. Like here on the character card, maybe I decide like what I also want to do now, use outlet context as returning an object, and I've also added foo to it. And maybe I just want a button, and on click, I'm going to call this function. And just like you were saying, like whatever we put on that context object is going to be available to any children of the outlet. And so now this button doesn't say anything. We'll have it say foo. And let me go ahead and clear the text. And so I can pass stuff down. And I know I jumped in there a bit. Does that help to answer your question though?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great question. And Tim, yes, sir.
When, what Chris said, when you were uploading this to GitHub, where are you going to put this example code?
In the class demo and notes repo, and I will
Okay.
share the link to that later. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Okay, absolutely. All right, folks, thank you. This was a great review. I hope it's been helpful to go through this, even though we had a couple twists and turns. We ended up getting a working implementation with pretty much everything we wanted and got a little time to talk through context and stuff like that. Just to put the finishing touches on this, with this context object, JavaScript gives you some syntactic sugar so that if I have a variable name and I'm making an object prop that's the same, I can just do this. And it's the same thing. And I wanted to illustrate this specifically because I realized that that's a potential source of confusion when we're looking at it. And so then from yesterday, you know, what we saw was that object in here like this. Right, but that does the exact same thing as doing it this way. So that's probably a good point to stop and wrap. And then I think we do have to switch gears for the retro. Let me go ahead and stop recording, and then we'll plan our next step.